Hello, brothers and sisters. The title of the message today is Sufficiency Under God's Grace. God gave us the garden, number one. God gave us the light when we were in the darkness. He gave us the man and gave us the breath of life and made us the living soul. And God gave us the garden and let us rule and keep the garden. In order for us to cultivate the garden, God gave us the breath of life and made us to become living soul. If the breath of life comes into man, everything becomes possible. We begin to think, feel, speak, and behave. If the motor is started, every part of the machine begins to function. If an automobile starts the engine, every part of function properly. And if the breath of life comes into soil, it became the living soul. When the seed comes into the soil, various kinds of fruits begins to bear. God gave everything, they became possible. Suppose God did not give everything, nothing could have become possible. Therefore, if we know the fact that God gave everything and we can taste and enjoy everything abundant and sufficient. But if we don't know the fact that God will give us everything, we'll try to make artificially, everything becomes difficult and hard. If the breath of life comes into people, people begin to move, work out various kinds of things and produce them. They are possible because God gives us everything. Suppose God doesn't give us everything, nothing will be happening. As such, seed must come in and bear various kinds of grains and fruits. Therefore, the fundamental issue is what God will give us, not what and how people try to work out. If we read Genesis chapter 2, verse 8, now the Lord God had planted a garden in the east in Eden, and there he put the man he had formed. The garden means the park and the orchard. Orchard means eating, park means play and take a rest. Thus, God gave the garden to man means God gave a place to eat, play, and rest. This is the blessing that God gave to men. For little kids, they don't work, just eat, sleep, and take a rest. That's all. As they eat, play, and sleep, they grow up and they do something new every time. First, they lay down and prostrate, and then they creep and stand up, and they talk and walk. As their life grows up gradually, and they keep doing something new spontaneously. How easy it is as they grow up, they try various and prosperous kinds of behaviors. They don't work at all, but all they have to do is just eat, play, and take a rest. If a man grows up, those behaviors just appear naturally, but if we try to make out artificially in an objectified manner, how difficult it would be. It would be so difficult and hard for a grown-up to try to creep like babies. I try myself to creep like babies because they said it is good for your backache. But it was so hard. Yoga or remedial, the gymnastics were made as they copied various kinds of behaviors of babies. But if grown-ups try to do it, it's so difficult. As the breath of life enters into human body, everything becomes possible. We cannot predict what kind of thing will come out next, but if the breath of life is breathed, those things that are beyond our imagination become possible. But if the breath of life is turned off, everything will be stopped. So many things came out, but once the breath is cut off, everything will be cut off. It is the same as electric supply. So many things are operated, but if the supply is cut off, all operation will be stopped. People are the same. Just now he was breathing, but if the breath is cut off, everything of him will be stopped. Whether those things were given by God or not, that is the fundamental issue. Things that we do this or do that is next issue. What God gave us is everything and most important. God gave us the garden. God put us at the place where we can eat, play, and take a rest. But after Adam ate the fruit of good and evil, God said, "Cursed is the ground because of you. Through painful toil, you will eat of it all the days of your life. It'll produce thorns and thistles for you, and you will eat the plants of the field." It was no longer the garden. The garden is the place where Adam could eat, play, and take rest. But as Adam left the garden, all kinds of negative things covered up the life of Adam. Therefore, the fact that God gave us the garden in the blessing itself. God created man, let him live in the garden, become prosperous, keep and rule over the garden. Therefore, if we can become recovered into God naturally, we'll be recovered into the garden. We'll be recovered to the life we keep and rule over the garden. This garden was created in the eastern part of Eden, and Eden means the joy. God had joy, and he created Eden in his joy. Parents have the joy, and children are born in the joy. Children play, eat, and fall asleep in that joy. Like the same manner, God created garden in his joy. The position of the garden, the source of the garden, is the joy and satisfaction of God. Therefore, where there is God's joy and satisfaction, the garden, where people eat, play, and take rest, can be created anytime. Genesis chapter 2, verse 2 through 3, by the seventh day God had finished the work he had been doing. So on the seventh day he rested from all his work, and God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done. As God took a rest, he gave blessing to his people. Thus the blessing of people in God rest. Blessing doesn't exist separately. In God's rest, people's blessing exists. If God cannot rest, God feels restlessness. If God cannot become joyous and become full of fury, man receives the curse. There is no other way. Curse doesn't exist separately. Therefore, if we only can make God joyous, everything will turn to the blessing. And if we make him furious, we automatically receive the curse. God himself is a lump of joy, and Eden is a satisfaction and ecstasy of God. Thus, his joy and satisfaction becomes our blessing, creation, prosperity, and glory. We must understand the fact that God is a huge lump of joy. He's a lump of satisfaction and joy, that because of the existence of the sun, the light comes out, and we can feel the light and warmth. As there is God's Eden, everything is possible. People can eat, play, and take rest. If there is no Eden, we cannot eat, play, and take rest. After a baby is born, if parents continue to have family squabbles, restlessness, melancholy, and under the anguish, babies cannot eat, play, and sleep well enough. When a baby eats mom's milk, if mom is furious, baby gets shocked and have fever. And if mom drinks something cold and feed the milk to the the baby will have diarrhea. Mom's taste will be conveyed to the baby right away. But strange enough, even though mom is angry, if mom gives milk to the baby, she'll automatically feel so good. God made mom's instinct that way, so that the mom can give milk to the baby and feel so nice. God prevented not to get angry when mom gives milk to the baby. If mom continues to get angry as she feels the baby will be angry too. But God made mom's instincts to be happy. When she feeds the baby can receive good milk always. As God himself is Eden, he was able to create the Eden. God's Eden is our garden. On his standing point, it is Eden, and on our standing point, it is our garden. On his standing point, it is joy, peace, and satisfaction. And on our standing point, it is the place for eating, playing, and resting. Therefore, how important the Eden is. Yes. As there is Eden source, people can enjoy peace and rest. God puts people in the garden. God gave garden to people. And God let people get satisfaction, happiness, and the rest. Mysteriously, people just eat, play, and take a rest there, but the source of garden is moved into people, and people themselves became Eden and garden is prepared. As a result, other people also can take a rest there. God created a garden in Eden, then people became the garden and Eden. God gave this to people, and God created garden among people. We can say God gave people Eden, or God gave garden to people, and we can say Eden became the garden. God created the garden in Eden. Where there is Eden garden is created. If there is Eden in ourselves, garden will be created. If I have the joy in myself, that joy that becomes the garden where people can eat, play, and take rest. But if I'm under the irritable movement, melancholy and unpleasant, it can become the garden, but it becomes the thorn bush. People must sweat in their forehead, work hard, and produce thistles. Among family members, if grandfather, the head of the family, becomes the Eden, all family members can live in the garden. But if the head of the family becomes irritable, full of complaining, and becomes angry, all family members must sweat on their forehead and eat their food in tears. They have no other choice. Suppose the head of the family becomes satisfied and happy, all family members can dwell in the garden. But if the head is unhappy, all family members inevitably live in the thorns and thistles. Even though they don't want to live like that, but no matter how hard they may try, it is impossible to overcome. No head wants to make his wife and children live in the thorn bush in the world, but if he doesn't own Eden in himself, he cannot create the garden. When he has Eden in himself, he can create the garden. If we don't have Eden in ourselves, we cannot create the garden. All the people around us lead their life in the world where there is the thorn bush, and they will sweat in the forehead and eat their food in tears. Moses was the representative in the whole Old Testament Bible. There was no one better than Moses in Israel. Moses could give Israel the best thing in his time, but the best thing he could give was the just laws. The garden which he made was the garden of laws. Because of the temperaments of Moses, he made the garden of laws, and people who lived under Moses also had to live in the garden of laws. They had to live where they received a word when they did something good. They received punishment when did they something bad. That was the limit of the Garden of Moses. But what happened when the time of Jesus came? Jesus created the Garden of Jesus. The Garden of Jesus was just full of grace and truth. The garden was full of the laws, but full of grace and truth. It was changed. Disciples said, from the fullness of his grace we have all received one blessing after another. That was confession of disciples. Eventually, according to the temperaments of the man, the garden would become different. The garden that was created by Moses and the garden that was created by Jesus were quite different. And those people who lived in the garden of Moses, they have no other choice but to eat what Moses prepared for them. And those people who lived in the garden of Jesus, they had no other choice but to eat what Jesus has prepared for them. Romans chapter 5, verse 12, it said, therefore, just as sin entered the world through one man, and the death through sin, and this way death came to all men, because all sinned. When the people of Israel were sick and tired of the laws of Moses, Jesus came. When the laws of Moses were worn out and the dark period was continued on in Israel, at the end of that period, Jesus came. In Jesus, there was no laws at all, but so many Christian leaders misinterpreted Jesus, and Christianity again became consolidators of laws. Everything turned to the laws when there is no life. In the world of laws, the life will receive persecution, hardship, and tribulation. God created garden at the east side of the Eden. Let the beautiful fruits, delicious fruits grow up, and let people eat them. The relationship between God and man could be connected with the fruit of life. Without this fruit of life, life of the garden cannot be normalized. This garden came out from Eden of God, and in order to live here, people must eat the fruit of life. The God's Eden is the Eden of life. In order to communicate in the Eden of life, we have to eat the fruit of life. Without eating the fruit of life, we cannot live there. That's why God told Adam and Eve not to eat the fruit of good and evil. If we want to live in the garden, we should not eat the fruit of good and evil. Just eating the fruit of life, we cannot live in the garden. If we eat the fruit of life, we can eat, play, and take a rest. The fruit of life becomes the true food, and when we eat this, the fruit, and grow up, everything becomes possible. But there is no fruit of life, but just the fruit of good and evil in the world. People will just take the laws. That's why. People can grow up by eating the fruit of life and become developed, just as people cannot eat the fruit of life. They cannot grow up and become developed. When people start to believe in Jesus, they can experience a great joy. They turn back from the world. They recognize God. Before, they had the attitude of denying God. But as they kneel down before God, they can become transformed. Yes. But the problem is they cannot grow up from that point on. As they cannot grow up, they cannot produce anything new, and they return to the old laws again. As they return to the laws, they begin to teach and return to the old people again. This is the reality and state of Christians today. When they first believed in Jesus, they were led by God clearly, but they cannot grow up as they don't eat the fruit of life, and as they cannot grow up, they try to make artificial things, and they try to make laws again because they feel the necessity. And leaders that give loss to the followers and try to teach continually, you must do this and you must do that. You shouldn't do this or you shouldn't do that. During the Lee dynasty, Confucianists did the same thing in Korea. You have to offer sacrificial offering to your ancestors for 3 years. Or other times they taught you have to offer sacrificial offering to your ancestor for just 1 year. It became tradition. Descendants had to have the willing heart, but when they actually became reluctant, they made the laws, their religion and laws became dead husks that gave people a lot of hardship and difficulties. In their hearts, 1 year is enough. But if the law teaches you have to offer sacrificial offering for 3 years, it's such a torturing to their hearts. Those regulations suppressed life and gave a great burden to the hearts of the people. In order to dwell in God's garden, the people must eat the fruit of life. We should not eat things that are not life. We should not eat laws. We should not eat things such as regulation, principles, or laws and bylaws. If we eat such kind of things, we cannot live in the garden. Those things came out from the tree of good and evil. When our parents die, we have to offer sacrificial offering for 3 years. That kind of teaching came out from the knowledge of good and evil. The life that comes out from our deep inside are different from knowledges. Even though the fact, if people try to define with knowledges, we cannot enjoy the life in the Garden of Eden. Thank you. Hallelujah. May God bless every one of you. Thank you again. Thank you.